Translate this and I'll marry you. Billionaire mocked Janitor. He did it and she fell in love for real. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We have noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It is quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let us keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to the story. It started with laughter. Not the friendly kind, the sharp, echoing laughter that fills a room and cuts the air thin. Inside the glass-walled auditorium of Moore Global Technologies, a crowd of investors stood around marble floors and chrome podiums, champagne in hand, while a woman in an ivory suit adjusted her mic. Evelyn Moore, 38, billionaire, self-made, and famously impatient. A man in a gray janitor uniform knelt just a few feet away, quietly mopping the edge of the stage. No one paid him any attention until Evelyn paused mid-speech, noticed him, and smirked. "Translate this and I'll marry you," she said, turning to him. The line was meant as a joke, something to amuse her guests, a little superiority disguised as charm. The audience burst out laughing, a few claps echoing in mock applause. But the janitor straightened slowly. His name was David Carter. His eyes met hers, not defiant, not shy, just calm. He repeated her entire sentence fluently in French, then Spanish, then Mandarin, word for word, tone for tone. The laughter died instantly. Evelyn blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Someone near the buffet whispered, "Did he just?" Another investor chuckled nervously, trying to restart the mood. But David's calm was unshakable. He set the mop aside, nodded politely, and said, "Language is not about power, ma'am. It is about respect." The room fell silent. Tom, the event coordinator, stepped forward quickly, trying to recover control. "Sir, this is a private function. Please move to the service area." His voice carried that tone, half warning, half insult. Evelyn said nothing. She simply watched, eyes narrowing, curious but still dismissive. David smiled faintly, the kind of smile that does not bend, only reflects. "I am already in the right place," he said quietly, and went back to cleaning the edge of the stage. A few young employees exchanged glances. One of them, Maya from the communications team, held her phone low, recording discreetly. She mouthed, "This is insane." Tom leaned toward Evelyn and whispered, "We should have security escort him out." She shrugged. "It is fine. Let him finish mopping. He seems to enjoy performing." Her words sliced through the air. David heard it, of course. He did not look up, but his movements slowed, deliberate, almost graceful. He was listening to the sound of laughter, to the click of expensive heels, to the rhythm of judgment. Somewhere deep inside that calm exterior, he recognized this pattern. He had seen it before at 22, when he was mistaken for a delivery man in a building he had just bought. At 29, when a board member called him the quiet assistant, and now again, at 41, in a room full of people who had no idea that he was the very man whose company was about to acquire theirs. He did not plan to reveal it yet. Not here, not like this. He wanted to see who Evelyn truly was when she believed no one important was watching. The crowd began whispering again, trying to dissolve the tension. Evelyn cleared her throat and turned back to the microphone. "Anyway, as I was saying, innovation requires confidence and class." She emphasized that last word as if it were a blade. "Some people have it, and some just clean up after it." "MSIT." A soft, collective gasp rippled through the hall. David stopped moving. He looked up, eyes steady, voice calm. "Confidence without kindness is just noise," he said. Maya's phone trembled in her hand. She whispered, "Oh my God." He said that out loud. Tom snapped, "Sir, you are done here." David placed the mop upright against the wall and began to walk toward the exit, every step slow, measured, silent. The kind of silence that makes people listen. No one realized that the badge clipped to his belt was not a janitor tag but a master access key to every restricted floor in the building. No one noticed that the man they had just mocked carried himself like someone who owned his time and soon their future. As the door closed behind him, Evelyn exhaled, shaking off the awkwardness. "What a show," she said lightly. "Someone hire him for entertainment next time." But not everyone laughed. In the corner, Maya pressed stop on her recording, her heart pounding. Something in her told her this was not over, not even close. Outside the glass doors of the auditorium, the hallway stretched long and quiet. David Carter walked slowly, his reflection gliding across the polished marble floor. Behind him, the noise of laughter and champagne faded into the hum of air conditioning. He reached for his phone, scrolled once, and then stopped. One message waited at the top of the screen. "Ready when you are." He did not reply yet. Timing was everything. Back inside the event, Evelyn Moore's presentation resumed, but the energy in the room had changed. The audience still smiled, but uneasily. Something about that moment with the janitor lingered in the air like a scent of truth no one wanted to acknowledge. Maya, the young communications assistant, kept her phone in her pocket now. She had filmed more than she intended. Part of her wanted to delete the clip and pretend nothing happened. The other part whispered that she had just witnessed something important. At the end of the presentation, Evelyn stepped off the stage. The crowd surrounded her immediately: executives, investors, journalists, all eager to congratulate her on another visionary talk. She smiled for the cameras, poised and untouchable. But inside, the memory of that man's calm voice kept replaying. Language is not about power. It is about respect. She brushed it off, or tried to. Tom approached with a grin that did not quite hide his embarrassment. "You handled that perfectly, Miss Moore," he said. "That janitor was clearly trying to make a scene." Evelyn nodded. "There is always someone looking for attention. It is part of the job." Still, her eyes drifted toward the doors where David had left. For a second, she wondered who he was. His tone had not been defensive or desperate. It had been controlled, assured, almost elegant. That kind of composure did not belong to a man mopping floors. Meanwhile, David had made his way to the service corridor behind the stage. He took off the gray uniform jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it on a cart. Beneath it, a black dress shirt and a silver watch glinted under the fluorescent light. His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. "Proceed to Phase 1, he said simply. On the other end, a woman's voice replied, "Understood, Mr. Carter. Your arrival at the executive meeting is confirmed for 2 p.m. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and exhaled slowly. The plan was unfolding exactly as he expected. For weeks, Arcadia Holdings had been negotiating the quiet acquisition of more global technologies. What Evelyn did not know was that her company's culture audit ordered as part of the deal was about to be presented to her board that same afternoon, and the janitor she had mocked would be the one delivering it. By noon, the press conference ended. Guests filtered out to the terrace for lunch. Evelyn stood by the glass railing, looking down at the city skyline. The wind tugged gently at her hair. She checked her reflection in the glass, perfect as always. Yet something about the quiet bothered her. Maya approached hesitantly. "Miss Moore?" Evelyn turned, her tone polite but clipped. "Yes?" "I wanted to apologize about earlier," Maya said. "That moment with the janitor. It felt wrong." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Wrong? It was harmless. People joke all the time." Maya hesitated. He did not seem like someone who was joking back. He seemed sincere. For the first time, Evelyn felt a small sting of doubt. She dismissed it quickly. "Focus on your work, Maya. Leave the philosophy to me." Maya nodded, but the disappointment showed on her face. She walked away, pulling out her phone. The video she had recorded earlier still sat on her screen, paused on the exact frame where David said, "Confidence without kindness is just noise." She did not post it, but she saved it. At 1:30, Evelyn entered the executive boardroom on the top floor. The room smelled of coffee and ambition. Her senior team was already seated, murmuring over spreadsheets and acquisition documents. She took her place at the head of the table. Tom leaned in and whispered, "The representatives from Arcadia are running a few minutes late." Evelyn smirked. "Let them be. It will give us time to prepare the welcome speech." The double doors opened. Conversations stopped. David Carter walked in, dressed in a tailored navy suit, calm and composed. For a moment, no one spoke. Tom's jaw dropped. Evelyn froze, recognition flooding her face. He walked to the end of the table, set down his briefcase, and said in the same steady tone that had silenced the auditorium earlier, "Good afternoon. I am David Carter, founder and chief executive officer of Arcadia Holdings. Thank you for hosting me." The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air vent and the faint click of a pen dropping somewhere near the back. Evelyn's throat tightened. "You," she began, but he raised a hand gently. "I prefer professionalism over surprise," he said. "But perhaps this meeting will translate better than the last one." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. One coughed into his fist. Evelyn forced a smile that barely held. "Mr. Carter, I did not realize—" "That is the beauty of assumptions," he interrupted softly. "They make introductions unnecessary." For a long second, no one dared to move. David opened his briefcase and began placing files on the table, each marked with the logo of Arcadia Holdings. He spoke evenly, without anger, without pride. "Today's presentation covers more than numbers," he said. "It is about culture, respect, and the cost of forgetting what those words mean." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her pen. Across the room, Maya peeked through the doorway, heart pounding. She knew this was the man from earlier, the one everyone had laughed at, the one who was now commanding the entire boardroom. David looked up from his papers and met Evelyn's eyes. His expression was unreadable, calm as ever. "Shall we begin?" he asked. She nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. "Yes, please." The meeting had not even started, and yet everyone in that room already knew nothing about this day would go as planned. The boardroom lights dimmed slightly as the projector flickered to life. A soft blue glow washed over the table, casting long reflections on polished glass. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the screen, but none more intently than Evelyn Moore's. David Carter stood at the front, remote in hand, his voice calm and deliberate. "This," he began, "is not just an audit, it is a mirror." Slide after slide appeared statistics, employee surveys, anonymous testimonials. Words like dismissive, elitist, and hostile environment hovered in bold letters across the wall. Each one landed like a quiet blow. The room, once filled with the hum of casual confidence, was now heavy with silence. David continued, "We reviewed over 6 months of internal communication logs, staff interviews, and customer feedback. The numbers are consistent. 91% of junior employees believe advancement is tied to appearance, not merit. 80% have witnessed discriminatory remarks go unaddressed." Tom shifted in his chair, his earlier arrogance melting into unease. "These surveys are exaggerated," he muttered under his breath. David looked at him. "Mr. Benson, your name appears in 3 of the reports." The room froze. Tom paled and looked down at the table. Evelyn's eyes darted toward him, sharp and cold. For a moment, she wanted to defend him, but the evidence on screen made that impossible. David clicked to the next slide. A short video clip appeared, security footage from the very morning's event. Evelyn's voice echoed through the speakers. "Translate this, and I will marry you." Then the laughter. Then David's calm response. "Language is not about power. It is about respect." You could feel the oxygen thin in the room. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her pen until it nearly snapped. The humiliation she had dismissed as a harmless joke was now projected in front of her entire board. David paused the video. "Culture," he said, "is what happens when people believe no one is watching. But someone always is." He let the silence stretch for a full 5 seconds before continuing. "Arcadia Holdings believes in transformation, not destruction. Our intention is not to dismantle more global technologies, but to rebuild it from the inside, with dignity at its foundation." A few board members nodded carefully, sensing the shift in tone. Evelyn, still silent, stared down at the table. Her reflection trembled faintly in the glass surface. David's voice softened. "When I walked into your event this morning, I wanted to see who your company really was. Not on paper, but in action. I saw brilliance and blindness. I saw potential and pride." He closed the laptop, the click echoing like a full stop. "Now, I am giving you a choice. We can finalize this merger as planned, with leadership adjustments to match our shared values. Or we can walk away and let public perception decide the rest." The boardroom erupted into whispers. One executive leaned toward Evelyn. "If we lose this deal, the market will eat us alive." Another whispered, "We need him more than he needs us." Evelyn stayed quiet. She could feel heat rising behind her eyes, not from anger but from something else, recognition. Recognition of the truth she had spent years ignoring. David turned to leave. "Take some time," he said. "My team will return tomorrow for your decision." But as he reached the door, Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Carter." He stopped, looked back. She stood slowly, her posture still proud but no longer hard. "You were right," she said. This company was built on innovation, but somewhere along the way I stopped listening. I stopped respecting the people who made it possible. The confession hung in the air, raw and human. David studied her face. Acknowledgement is the first step. What you do next will decide the rest. She nodded once, steadying herself. Then I want to fix it. I want to start today. The board members exchanged cautious glances. This was not the Evelyn they knew. David returned to the table, resting his hands lightly on the surface. Then begin with an apology, he said simply. Not to me, to them. Evelyn inhaled slowly. Her pride battled her conscience. But for once, conscience won. She turned to the staff seated at the end of the room, the assistants, the junior analysts, the quiet ones who rarely spoke. I owe you all more than I can express, she said. I allowed arrogance to become policy. I let success blind me to the dignity that built it. I am sorry. No one moved. Then Maya stepped forward from the doorway. Apologies are rare in rooms like this, she said softly. Maybe that is how change starts. Evelyn gave a small, grateful smile. Maybe it is. Ugh. David looked at Maya, then back at Evelyn. The tension in the room eased, like a storm finally beginning to clear. He gathered his papers. Arcadia will support your reforms, he said. But remember, respect cannot be written into policy. It must be lived. As he left the boardroom, the sun broke through the clouds outside, spilling light across the conference table. Evelyn watched him go, something new stirring behind her calm eyes. It was not fear anymore. It was admiration. She whispered under her breath, just loud enough for herself to hear, "Translate this and I will marry you. Maybe I meant it after all." And for the first time that day, she smiled. Not the smile of power, but the smile of possibility. The next morning, the city woke under a quiet rain. Soft droplets traced patterns down the mirrored windows of More Global's headquarters. Inside, the lobby buzzed with a different kind of energy, quieter, cautious, aware. Word had spread quickly through the building. The janitor from yesterday was actually the man behind the company's biggest merger in a decade. David Carter arrived just after 8. He walked past the same reception desk where he had once been invisible. This time, people noticed. Some greeted him respectfully. Others pretended to be busy, unsure of how to act. He nodded politely to everyone, calm as ever. He did not carry resentment, only purpose. Upstairs, Evelyn Moore stood in her office overlooking the skyline. The light rain blurred the city into soft gray lines. Her reflection stared back from the glass-sharp suit. Perfect posture, but she barely recognized herself. Yesterday had stripped away the armor she wore for years, and oddly, she felt lighter without it. Her assistant knocked. "Mr. Carter is here." Evelyn took a slow breath. "Send him in." David entered with a quiet confidence that filled the room without effort. He was dressed in the same navy suit as before, simple and precise. Evelyn gestured toward the chairs. "Thank you for coming." "I said I would return," he replied, "and I keep my word." They sat facing each other, the rain whispering against the glass. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Evelyn broke the silence. "I watched the recording last night," she said. "The one from the event." David studied her expression. "And? I did not like the woman I saw," she admitted, "but I needed to." He nodded slowly. "That is what mirrors are for." She almost smiled at the line. "You could have humiliated me publicly, and no one would have blamed you. But you did not." "Revenge teaches nothing," he said simply. "Redemption does." Evelyn leaned back, thoughtful. "I want to rebuild this company from the inside, as you said. But I also know change will not come from a press release. I need guidance." David looked out the window for a moment, then back at her. "Then start with one rule," he said. "Listen before you lead." She nodded. "I can do that." "Good," he said. "Because in an hour, we will hold an open meeting in the atrium. Every employee is invited to speak freely without fear. You will listen. No defenses, no excuses." Evelyn blinked. "Today?" "Today," he confirmed. "Change delayed is change denied." A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "You plan fast." "I plan real," he replied. By 9:30, the atrium filled. Hundreds of employees gathered, some curious, some anxious. The air hummed with quiet anticipation. David stood off to the side, while Evelyn took the microphone at the center. Her voice trembled slightly at first, but grew steadier with each word. "Yesterday, I learned what pride sounds like when it forgets to be human," she began. And today, I am here to listen. No titles, no hierarchy, just honesty. At first, no one spoke. Then Maya stepped forward from the crowd. Miss Moore, she said, yesterday, I filmed what happened because I felt powerless. I thought no one would believe me otherwise. I want to work in a company where no one needs proof to be treated with respect. The room murmured in agreement. Evelyn's eyes softened. You are right, she said. And I owe you gratitude, not anger, for holding up the mirror. One by one, others followed. An accountant spoke about being overlooked for promotions. A maintenance worker described how management ignored safety requests. Even Tom, pale and humbled, admitted his mistakes. I thought authority meant superiority, he said. I was wrong. Each story added weight to the silence that followed. Evelyn listened to every word, taking notes by hand, not interrupting once. For the first time, her leadership looked less like command and more like courage. When the final speaker finished, Evelyn set down her pen. Thank you, she said. Every word you spoke today will shape what happens next. From now on, respect will not be a slogan on the wall. It will be our daily practice. The crowd applauded not loud but sincere. Some people even smiled through tears. David stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. This is what real transformation looks like, he said. Not from contracts or mergers, but from humility. He turned to Evelyn. You kept your promise to start today. Now keep it every day. She nodded. I will. The crowd began to disperse, their footsteps echoing softly against the marble. Evelyn stayed behind with David, standing where the morning light poured through the glass ceiling. The rain had stopped, leaving streaks of silver on the windows. Thank you, she said quietly. Not for saving my company, but for reminding me what it means to lead. David's eyes held hers for a moment. Leadership is not about being the loudest voice in the room, he said. It is about being the first to listen. Something in his tone stayed with her calm, grounded, unshakable. She smiled faintly. You have a way of making lessons sound poetic. He shrugged lightly. Only because people forget the simple truths. As they stood there, the light shifted, filling the space between them with warmth instead of tension. Evelyn realized she was looking at a man who carried power differently, not through dominance, but through grace. David, she said softly, I meant what I said that day, even if I did not know it yet. He raised an eyebrow. Which part? She smiled. Translate this and I will marry you. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Then I hope you keep translating, Miss Moore. Their laughter was quiet, genuine, and real. For the first time, it filled the building not with mockery, but with hope. And somewhere in that gentle echo, More Global began its second beginning. Weeks passed, and the atmosphere inside More Global began to shift. The once sterile offices, where people spoke in hushed tones and avoided eye contact, now carried the low buzz of collaboration. The walls that had divided departments started to feel less like barriers and more like bridges. Change, real change, had begun not through memos or slogans, but through behavior. Evelyn Moore arrived early every morning. No entourage, no polished speeches. She walked the halls, greeting people by name, listening more than she spoke. It startled some employees at first. They were not used to seeing their CEO take coffee beside the maintenance team or ask the accounting interns about their workload. But slowly, the skepticism faded. What replaced it was something Evelyn had never felt from her own staff before: trust. David Carter had kept his word too. Though Arcadia Holdings officially finalized the merger, he refused to install his own management team. Instead, he chose to mentor Evelyn directly, visiting twice a week to guide her and the executive board through the process of cultural reform. One of those mornings, they sat in her office overlooking the skyline. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the glass towers in warm gold. Evelyn poured coffee for both of them, something she never used to do for anyone. Do you know what the hardest part is? She asked, handing him the cup. David took it, smiling slightly. Admitting that you do not know everything? She laughed softly. Exactly that. He nodded. Leadership used to mean control, but real leadership means letting go of it. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the city below. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, he said. It is deliberate. Every day you will fight the temptation to be who you were yesterday. She looked at him for a moment, thoughtful. You speak like someone who has lived this lesson. I have, he replied quietly. When I started Arcadia, I lost half my team because I tried to lead with my ego instead of my empathy. I learned that success without compassion is just noise. The words struck her deeply. She recognized herself in them, the same hunger for control, the same blindness to the people holding up her empire. A knock interrupted the silence. Maya stepped in, carrying a folder. "Miss Moore, Mr. Carter," she said. "We finished the internal culture survey." Evelyn gestured for her to continue. Maya handed the report to David. "Employee satisfaction is up by 40%, and turnover has dropped by half." David flipped through the pages, impressed. "That is progress," he said. "Not perfect, but solid." Maya smiled. "There is something else. A journalist from Business Today requested an interview about the company's transformation. They said it has become a case study for leadership ethics." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "A few months ago, we were a cautionary tale. Now we are a case study?" Maya nodded. "Apparently, people like redemption stories." After she left, Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I am still not sure I deserve redemption." David met her eyes. "No one deserves it. They earn it. One decision at a time." She looked down at her coffee, quiet for a moment. "Do you ever think about that day, when I said those words? The translation challenge?" he asked. She nodded. "I replay it sometimes. It used to embarrass me. Now it reminds me how arrogance hides ignorance." He smiled faintly. "And humility reveals intelligence." Their eyes met across the desk. The air between them carried no tension now, only understanding. That afternoon, they attended the all-staff town hall. The entire atrium was filled again, but this time the atmosphere was electric with optimism. Large posters along the walls read, "Respect in every language." Evelyn stepped up to the microphone. "When we started this journey," she said, "I thought leadership was about proving my strength. But strength without empathy is weakness in disguise. Every person in this building has taught me that." The employees applauded warmly. She smiled, then looked toward David standing in the front row. "And there is one person who reminded me that humility is not a step down, it is a step forward. Mr. Carter, thank you." The applause grew louder. For the first time, Evelyn felt pride that was not built on power, but on people. David approached the stage, his expression calm, but his eyes warm. "Change is never perfect," he said, "but courage is contagious. What began as a misunderstanding has become a movement. You all chose to be part of it." Someone in the back shouted, "Speech! Tell us how it all started!" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Evelyn raised her hand to quiet them, then grinned. "You really want to know?" They cheered. She turned to David. "Then you tell them. After all, you were there." David hesitated for a second, then took the microphone. "It began with a sentence meant to humiliate," he said. "Translate this, and I will marry you." But sometimes, life has a sense of humor, because that sentence ended up translating something bigger: what happens when pride meets patience, and arrogance meets grace. The room fell quiet, captivated. Evelyn's eyes glistened. David continued, "What matters most is not how people see you when you are powerful, but how you treat others when you think they are not." The applause this time was thunderous. Some employees stood, others clapped through tears. As the noise filled the atrium, Evelyn turned to him, smiling. "You are good at this." He leaned closer, just enough for her to hear. "Only because the story has a good ending." Outside, the clouds parted, sunlight pouring through the tall windows. The words, "Respect in every language," shimmered on the glass like a promise kept. Evelyn looked out at her team people she had once seen as background but now recognized as the heartbeat of her company. She whispered, mostly to herself, "Maybe translation was never about words." David heard her and nodded. "No," he said. "It was always about understanding." And in that simple exchange, surrounded by applause and light, both of them knew the merger was no longer just between companies. It was between two hearts, learning to speak the same language. The story of Moore Global's transformation spread far beyond its headquarters. Within weeks, major media outlets ran headlines like, "From Mockery to Mastery, How One CEO Rebuilt Through Respect." Evelyn Moore found herself invited to conferences she once dominated for her intellect, now requested for her humility. She attended them all, but never alone. David Carter was always nearby, not in the spotlight, but beside it, the quiet force behind her new direction. Their partnership became the subject of fascination in the business world. Some called it a corporate miracle. Others called it a modern fable. Yet to them, it was something simpler. Two people learning, one from pride, one from patience. On a crisp Friday morning, they stood together in a television studio preparing for a live interview. Bright lights glowed overhead, cameras lined the floor, and a stage manager counted down in a low voice. Evelyn adjusted her earpiece while David straightened his tie. The host's voice echoed cheerfully from behind the curtain. Coming up next, a story that proves second chances can build empires. Huh? Evelyn smiled nervously. You have done 1,000 of these, she said. Do you ever stop feeling like you are walking into a storm? David chuckled. A storm keeps you honest. Just remember, speak truth, not perfection. The red light blinked on. Welcome back, the host began. Joining us today are two extraordinary leaders, Evelyn Moore and David Carter. Their story began with a single viral clip, one sentence that changed everything. Evelyn, I have to ask, do you remember the exact moment? Evelyn smiled, her expression soft but confident. Every second of it, she said. It was the moment my arrogance met its match. The host leaned forward. And your match, as it turns out, was a janitor who was not a janitor at all. David grinned slightly. Titles are temporary, he said. Character is not. The audience laughed, but it was warm, not mocking. Evelyn continued. That day taught me something I will never forget. When you stop seeing people as less than you start seeing what they really are, brilliant, capable, essential. The host nodded. And the two of you have continued working together since the merger. How has that been? David looked at Evelyn. Surprisingly easy. We share the same goal-build companies that do not just profit, but protect people. Evelyn added, and he still corrects my French. Laughter filled the studio. The host smiled knowingly. Well, I suppose the audience wants to know, has she improved? David leaned into the mic. Let us just say she is fluent in growth. Applause burst across the room. The energy was electric yet sincere. Evelyn felt something she had not felt in years, not pride, but peace. After the cameras stopped rolling, the host thanked them, and the crew began packing up. Evelyn and David walked out of the studio into the late morning Sunday. Reporters waited nearby, microphones ready, but David raised a hand gently. No more statements today, he said. Some stories do not need headlines. They need living. They stepped into the waiting car, silence stretching comfortably between them. Outside, the city moved in rhythm. Cars, lights, people, life, as usual. Evelyn glanced out the window. It feels strange, she said quietly. All of this attention. They see us as a success story, but what I remember most are the failures that got us here. David nodded. Failures are just lessons that arrived early. She smiled faintly. You really do turn everything into a proverb. Only because the truth is easier to remember that way, he said. The car slowed at a traffic light. Across the street, a man in a maintenance vest was fixing a broken sign. Evelyn watched him for a moment, his steady focus, the care in his work, the way no one seemed to notice him. Do you think he knows? She asked softly. Knows what? David replied. That people like him build everything we stand on. David followed her gaze. Maybe not. But that is why it is our job to remind them. The light turned green. The car pulled forward, the city unfolding around them like a film still moving. Later that afternoon, they arrived at the company's Community Outreach Center, a new initiative they had launched together. The sign above the door read, The Translation Project. Its purpose was simple: provide language classes, mentorship, and career support for service workers across the city: janitors, security guards, drivers, anyone who had ever been overlooked. Inside, a small crowd had gathered for the grand opening. Maya was there, standing by the podium, excitement glowing on her face. Miss Moore, Mr. Carter, everything is ready, she said. We even have volunteers from 3 departments. Evelyn smiled proudly. Good work, Maya. When she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell quiet. She began, This building is more than a project. It is a promise that no one will ever feel invisible in our presence again. Every language deserves respect. Every role deserves dignity. That is the translation we are making today. Applause filled the space. David followed her, his tone gentle yet firm. I started this journey pretending to be someone else, just to see how people would treat me. Today, I stand here as myself, and I see that the world can change if enough people decide to listen. The applause turned into cheers. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled, Evelyn and David stepped aside near the window. The afternoon sun poured in, catching golden reflections across the floor. She looked at him, her voice low. You know, if you had not walked into that event pretending to mop floors, none of this would have happened. He smiled. Sometimes the lowest floor teaches you the highest lesson. She laughed softly. And sometimes, translation really does lead to something more. He met her eyes, calm and steady. Something like love? She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then smiled. Something exactly like that. The noise of laughter and conversation filled the room behind them, but for that one small moment, everything was still two people standing in the light of their own redemption, no longer divided by power or pride. Outside, the new sign gleamed under the sunlight. The Translation Project. A reminder that one sentence, once spoken in arrogance, had now become a lifetime built on understanding. 6 months later, the Translation Project had become more than a program. It had become a movement. Across the city, new centers opened in neighborhoods that had long been ignored. Former janitors now taught basic computer literacy. Security guards were learning foreign languages to qualify for international positions. The name More Global, once associated with cold corporate prestige, now carried warmth. Evelyn Moore walked through the downtown center one evening, the winter air crisp outside the tall glass doors. Inside, the space buzzed with quiet energy rows of students repeating phrases in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. A whiteboard near the front read, "Respect translates better than any word." David Carter stood at the back of the room, watching a class in progress. When he saw her, he smiled. "You made it just in time. They are finishing their first course today." End quote. Evelyn slipped beside him, her voice soft. "You started this? I only followed." He shook his head. "No, I gave the idea. You gave it roots." They stood together in silence for a moment, listening to the rhythmic voices of learners repeating words that once felt foreign but now sounded like home. After the class ended, the instructor invited David and Evelyn to the front. A small woman in a maintenance uniform stepped forward, holding a certificate. "Before, I could not fill out job applications without help," she said into the microphone. "Now I can. But more than that, I can speak to my children in a language they are learning in school. That means everything to me." Applause filled the room. Evelyn's eyes glistened. "This," she whispered to David, "is what change looks like." Later that night, as the crowd dispersed, they lingered near the entrance, coats in hand. Outside, snow began to fall softly. The city lights blurred into halos of gold and white. "You ever think about that night?" Evelyn asked, her breath visible in the cold air. David smiled. "Which one? The night you walked into my event with that mop?" she said, laughing quietly. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it happened." He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it had to. Some lessons need a stage before they can become real." She nodded. "You were right about one thing, though. Revenge teaches nothing. Redemption does." He studied her for a moment. "And what have you learned since then?" She smiled faintly. "That respect is not just something you give, it is something you grow." They walked together down the sidewalk, their footsteps soft against the thin layer of snow. The streets glowed under the streetlights, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt a calm that success alone had never given her. When they reached the corner, David stopped. "You know," he said, "Arcadia has been expanding into Europe. I am leaving for Paris next week to oversee the launch of our education program there." Evelyn paused, caught off guard. "Paris?" He nodded. "Just for a few months. Maybe longer, depending on how things go." She tried to sound casual, but her voice betrayed a hint of sadness. "That is wonderful. You always said change should not stop at borders." He smiled. "I meant it, but I will miss this place, and the people in it." "Oh." Evelyn met his eyes. "And will you miss me?" He held her gaze, steady and honest. "Every day." The silence that followed was gentle, not heavy, the kind of silence that spoke more clearly than words. A snowflake landed on her sleeve, and she brushed it away slowly. "Then I suppose I will have to visit Paris. Someone has to make sure the French translation is correct." David laughed softly. "You are getting better at humor." "I am getting better at being human," she said. They reached the parking lot, where his car waited. The driver stepped aside as David opened the door but hesitated before getting in. "You know," he said quietly, "the day I first met you, I did not plan to teach anyone anything. I was just curious." "Curious about what?" she asked. "About how people change when they think no one important is watching." Evelyn tilted her head. And what did you find? He smiled. That sometimes the person who needs to change the most is the one holding the microphone. She laughed softly. Touché, Mr. Carter. He climbed into the car, but before closing the door, he added, Do not forget the promise we made. She frowned playfully. Which one? The translation. She leaned slightly toward him. Oh, that one. The driver started the engine, and David gave her one last look. Keep translating, Miss Moore. The car pulled away, taillights glowing red against the white snow. Evelyn watched until it disappeared down the street. Then she turned, walking back toward the center, her footsteps steady and sure. Inside, the janitorial team was cleaning up after the event. One of them paused and smiled at her. Evening, Miss Moore. She smiled back. Good work tonight. You are the reason this place shines. He looked surprised. Thank you, ma'am. No one usually says that. She nodded. They will now. Oh. As she walked down the empty hallway, the lights dimmed behind her, reflecting her shadow across the polished floor. The same floor a man once cleaned in silence while everyone else laughed. She stopped for a moment, looking at the reflection. Then she whispered to herself, Translate this, and I will marry you. The words no longer carried shame, they carried gratitude. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints, leaving only light behind. It felt like a new beginning written in white. And somewhere far across the ocean, on a flight bound for Paris, David Carter looked out his window, watching the same snow drifting through the clouds. He smiled to himself and whispered, Translation complete. Paris in spring had its own rhythm streets lined with blooming chestnut trees, the faint hum of cafe chatter, and the kind of light that turned ordinary moments into art. For David Carter, it was more than a city. It was a new chapter. Arcadia's European branch had taken off faster than he expected. Within months, the translation project opened its first international center near Montparnasse, helping immigrants and service workers learn the language of opportunity. But even amid success, something felt unfinished. Each night, after meetings and ribbon cuttings, David would find himself walking along the Seine, phone in hand, scrolling through old photos of More Global's transformation. He would pause when he reached one image, the two of them standing beneath a banner that read, Respect in every language. Evelyn's smile in that photo carried something deeper than gratitude. It carried connection. Thousands of miles away, in New York, Evelyn's days had become full again. She spoke at universities, mentored young CEOs, and continued expanding the translation project across the United States. Yet every accomplishment carried a quiet echo, a missing note she could not ignore. At night, when the city outside her penthouse went silent, she would replay David's final words before leaving. Keep translating, Miss Moore. 3 months passed before she made a decision. She called her assistant, Maya, early one morning. Book me a flight to Paris, she said. Maya hesitated. Business or personal? Evelyn smiled faintly. Let us call it unfinished work. 2 days later, she landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The air smelled of rain and roasted coffee. As her car drove through the city, she watched people move, artists, workers, students, all speaking in different tongues, yet somehow in harmony. It reminded her why she started the project in the first place. That afternoon, she arrived at the Paris Center unannounced. Inside, volunteers and students filled the hall with energy. Posters covered the walls, written in French, English, Arabic, and Swahili. Every voice matters. A receptionist greeted her warmly. Bonjour, madame. May I help you? I am looking for Mr. David Carter, Evelyn replied. The woman smiled knowingly. Ah, Monsieur Carter is teaching today. Down the hall, second door on the left. Evelyn followed the sound of laughter until she found him standing at the front of a classroom, sleeves rolled up, helping a group of older students pronounce English words. He was explaining the difference between through and though, his tone patient and kind. When he noticed her at the door, his expression softened, surprise mixing with warmth. Miss Moore, he said with a grin, did you get lost in translation? She laughed quietly. I told you I would visit. I like to keep my promises. He motioned for her to come in. The students, sensing something significant, smiled and whispered among themselves. One of them, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, raised his hand. Monsieur Carter, is this the woman from the video? David chuckled. Yes, she is. The one who learned how powerful words can be. The class applauded gently, and Evelyn blushed, a little embarrassed but genuinely touched. "Thank you," she said, "but I am still learning." When the lesson ended, they walked outside together, through the quiet courtyard behind the building. The afternoon sun cast golden reflections across the cobblestones. Evelyn looked around, admiring the vines climbing up the stone walls. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "It grows on you," David replied. "Literally. The ivy does not quit." She smiled, then turned serious. "You built something extraordinary here. I wanted to see it for myself." "And?" he asked. "And I wanted to say thank you," she said. "Not just for what you taught me, but for what you believed I could become." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You did that yourself." She hesitated, then said, "Maybe, but you translated it for me." "Oh?" They reached the edge of the courtyard, where a small cafe overlooked the river. They sat at a table near the window, the faint sound of jazz floating through the air. The waiter approached, and David ordered in fluent French. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You make it look easy." He smiled. "Languages are just bridges. You cross them one step at a time." Their coffee arrived, steaming gently between them. She took a sip, then looked out at the river. "You know, for months after you left, I kept hearing your voice in my head. Every time I made a decision, I asked myself, would David approve of this?" He chuckled. "That sounds exhausting." "It was," she admitted, "but it helped." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching boats drift beneath the Pont Neuf. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "I came here because there is something I need to translate properly. Something I never said right." David leaned forward, listening. "When I said, 'Translate this and I will marry you,' I was arrogant," she said. "But now I understand that translation is not about words. It is about understanding someone fully who they are, what they value. So, David," she paused, her voice steady but sincere, "if you still believe in translation, maybe it is time I kept my promise." For the first time, David seemed at a loss for words. The noise of the cafe faded around them, the world slowing to a breath. He smiled finally, quiet but sure. "You always were good at keeping promises." Evelyn smiled back, eyes shining. "Then I guess that makes us fluent." Outside, the light shifted, turning the city gold. A street musician began to play a soft melody that drifted through the open door. And in that simple Paris afternoon, two people who had once stood on opposite ends of pride and patience found themselves speaking the same language, not of power or apology, but of understanding, the kind that needs no translation at all. The weeks that followed in Paris felt lighter than either of them expected. What began as a visit stretched into something more permanent. Evelyn postponed her flight home 3 times, each excuse more transparent than the last. "There are a few details I need to finalize," she told her team in New York, but everyone knew. Change, for once, was not about business, it was about belonging. Every morning, she and David walked through the narrow streets of the left bank before the city fully woke. Vendors set up their market stalls, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. David would stop at the same cafe every morning, greet the barista by name, and order coffee for both of them in perfect French. Evelyn had started learning too, and though her accent was still sharp, she had improved. Sometimes he teased her gently, correcting a phrase or a tense. "You know," he said one morning, "for someone who used to hate being corrected, you take it rather well now." She smiled over her cup. "That is because now I like the teacher." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You really are getting fluent." In the afternoons, they worked together at the Paris branch of the translation project. Evelyn led workshops on leadership and inclusion, while David mentored young entrepreneurs from immigrant communities. They had turned the office into a bright, open space filled with maps, art, and laughter. But beyond the work, their partnership deepened quietly. It was not the kind of love built on grand declarations. It was built on rhythm, the way she finished his sentences, the way he reached for her hand without thinking, the way they moved in unspoken understanding. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they decided to walk by the Seine. The city glowed around them, street lamps reflected on the water like scattered stars. Evelyn leaned against the railing, her hair catching the soft wind. "It still feels strange," she said. "How life can rewrite itself." David stood beside her, his voice low. "Maybe it was not a rewrite. Maybe it was just a translation." She smiled. "Always the poet." He shrugged. "Truth sounds better when it rhymes." They both laughed. A small boat passed by, and the guide's voice carried faintly over the water, speaking about the bridges of Paris and the lovers who once carved their names into the stones. Evelyn listened, thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "That day, walking into my event, pretending to be someone else?" David paused. "No. Because that day showed me two versions of the same world, one built on ego and one built on empathy. I chose the second one." She turned to him. "And what about us? Which world are we in now?" He looked at her, steady and sure. "The one we built together." For a moment, the sound of the river filled the silence between them, gentle and endless. Evelyn reached for his hand. "Then let us keep building." The next morning, the Paris Translation Project hosted its largest event, yet a citywide seminar on cross-cultural communication. The hall was filled with hundreds of people from over 30 countries. Evelyn opened the session with her trademark calm. "When we talk about translation," she said, "we are not only speaking of words, we are speaking of people, of learning how to hear before we respond, of turning misunderstanding into connection. That is what leadership truly is, the ability to listen across difference." David took the stage after her. His voice carried through the hall, rich and even. "Some of you might know our story. It began with arrogance and ended with understanding. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is this: humility is the only universal language." The audience rose in applause. Many of them had followed their journey online, inspired by the viral story that once started as humiliation but had become a testament to grace. After the event, journalists gathered around, eager to ask questions. One of them, a young woman from a local magazine, smiled and said, "Miss Moore," rumor has it that the famous sentence, "Translate this and I will marry you," has taken on a new meaning. Is it true? Evelyn laughed, glancing at David. "It depends," she said playfully. "Are we translating arrogance or affection?" The reporter grinned. "Affection, I hope." David stepped closer, his tone warm. "Then yes, it is true. Though I think we prefer the quiet kind of love, the one that shows itself through action, not announcement." "Though?" The reporter nodded, satisfied, and the crowd moved on. When the hall finally cleared, Evelyn turned to him, smiling. "That was smooth." He smirked. "I had a good translator." That night, they returned to the same cafe where she had first found him teaching. The owner, an elderly woman named Lucette, greeted them like old friends and placed 2 cups of espresso on their usual table. Evelyn looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Do you ever think about going back to New York?" David shook his head. "Not yet. Paris still has a few lessons left to teach." "About language?" He smiled. "About love." They lingered there until the cafe closed, the sound of rain tapping lightly against the windows. As they stepped outside, Evelyn slipped her arm through his. "David," she said quietly, "you once told me that understanding is the bridge between hearts." He looked down at her, eyes warm. "I remember." She smiled. "Then I think we finally crossed it." He stopped walking, watching her under the dim glow of the street lamp. "Maybe," he said softly, "but the best part of a bridge is not crossing it, it is standing in the middle, together." She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then let us stay right here." And under the soft Paris rain, with the river whispering beside them, they did. Not as a CEO and a janitor, not as a lesson and a learner, but as 2 souls fluent in the same quiet language, one built not on words, but on understanding. Summer came to Paris with long evenings and a golden light that lingered until nearly 10. The city had slowed down, tourists filled the streets, and every cafe table seemed occupied by laughter. For David Carter and Evelyn Moore, life had found a calm rhythm: work in the mornings, long walks in the afternoons, and quiet dinners by the river. It was the kind of peace that felt earned, not borrowed. Their story had traveled far beyond what either of them expected. Business magazines called them the architects of compassion, while social media dubbed them the translation couple. Every time Evelyn saw one of those headlines, she smiled and shook her head. "They make it sound like we planned it," she said one evening, stirring sugar into her coffee. David laughed softly. "You cannot plan humility. You just survive it." They were sitting on the terrace of their favorite cafe, overlooking the Pont des Arts. Musicians played nearby, and the murmur of the river filled the pauses between their words. For a while, they simply watched people pass: students, painters, lovers. Paris had a way of making every stranger look like a story waiting to be told. "Do you ever miss New York?" David asked. Evelyn thought for a moment. "I miss the skyline, the noise, but not the version of me that lived there." He nodded. "Sometimes leaving a place is the only way to find yourself." She smiled. "And sometimes finding yourself leads you somewhere you never planned to go." That night, as they walked home, a summer storm began to roll in. The first drops fell as they crossed the bridge, gentle at first, then heavier, turning the cobblestones slick with reflections. Evelyn laughed and kicked off her heels, running barefoot across the rain-soaked street. David followed, shaking his head, grinning. When they finally ducked under the awning of a closed bookstore, she was soaked and breathless, her laughter echoing off the walls. "You used to hate getting caught in the rain," he said. "I used to hate losing control," she replied. "Now I think it is the only way to really live." He looked at her, hair damp, eyes alive, a woman transformed not by power, but by peace. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she answered simply. "For the first time, I am." They stood there for a while, the rain drumming like soft applause around them. Then she turned to him and said, "You know, we never finished that sentence." "What sentence?" "Translate this and I will marry you." Her voice carried no teasing now, only quiet certainty. "You have been translating my world since the day we met. Maybe it is time I kept my promise." David's breath caught, the moment grounding him completely. "Evelyn," she smiled, stepping closer. "You do not have to say anything, just do not say no." He reached for her hands, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I would never say no." The rain fell harder, but neither of them moved. The city blurred around them, lights turning into halos, footsteps fading into rhythm. And there, beneath the awning of a bookstore in the middle of Paris, he kissed her for the first time. It was not cinematic or rehearsed. It was real, honest, like two pages finally meeting in the same story. When the rain finally slowed, they walked back to their apartment, hand in hand, shoes in the other. The streets shimmered with puddles that reflected the glow of street lamps. The next morning, the news broke faster than they imagined. A tourist had filmed them under the awning, and the video had gone viral overnight. The caption read, "The CEO and the janitor love translated in Paris." Comments flooded in from around the world, celebrating not just the romance, but what it represented: growth, grace, forgiveness. At first, Evelyn groaned. "We are trending again?" David chuckled. "At least this time, for the right reasons." That afternoon, they returned to the translation project headquarters to find their staff waiting with flowers and applause. Maya had flown in from New York, grinning from ear to ear. "You two broke the internet again," she said. "And this time, everyone is calling it the most poetic full circle in business history." Evelyn laughed, her cheeks flushing. "We were just walking home," Maya winked. "Apparently, the world loves stories that end in the rain." David raised an eyebrow. "Who said it ended?" The team erupted in laughter and cheers. Then Evelyn stepped forward, her voice warm but firm. "All of this, every headline, every video, none of it means anything if we do not keep the promise that started it. Respect, dignity, humanity, those are the real translations." The applause was quiet this time, thoughtful. David looked around the room, then back at her. "And those are the words we live by." Later that evening, when the building had emptied and the lights had dimmed, Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the city that had changed everything. David joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You realize," he said softly, "we turned a humiliation into hope." She leaned against him. "No," she said. "We turned misunderstanding into meaning." He smiled. "That sounds better." The city lights shimmered below them, their reflections stretching across the glass. Evelyn whispered, "You know what they say about Paris?" He looked at her. "What?" "That it is the city of love, but maybe it is really the city of translation where every broken word finds a new beginning." David kissed her forehead gently. "Then let us keep translating, Mrs. Carter." She laughed softly, the title rolling naturally off his tongue. "That has a nice sound to it." Ugh. And as the night settled over the city, the story that began with laughter and arrogance had found its true language, not one of pride or apology, but of partnership. Two voices, once worlds apart, now spoke as one. No subtitles needed. Autumn came softly to Paris, wrapping the city in shades of amber and bronze. The air turned crisp, the leaves swirled across the boulevards, and the cafes began serving cinnamon again. Life had slowed to a beautiful rhythm for David and Evelyn Carter. The translation project had become an international network spanning 12 countries, and More Global had evolved into a case study in corporate empathy. But more than that, the couple had found something: they never chased peace. They now lived in a modest apartment overlooking the Seine, far from the glass towers they once ruled. In the mornings, Evelyn still woke before sunrise, a habit from her years as a CEO, but now, instead of diving into spreadsheets, she brewed coffee and read poetry. David often joined her on the balcony, half awake, smiling as the city blinked itself alive below. One morning, as they watched the sun rise over the rooftops, Evelyn spoke softly. "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" David smiled. "Every day, from a mop to a movement, from a boardroom battle to breakfast on a balcony." She laughed. "When you put it like that, it sounds like a movie." He shrugged. "Maybe it is, except ours had no script." Their laughter faded into comfortable silence. The church bells from across the river began to chime. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think success was about being seen," she said. "Now I think it is about seeing others." David nodded. "You finally translated the language of leadership," she smiled. "And you translated my heart." Later that week, they returned to New York for the first time since moving to Paris. More Global was celebrating its 50th anniversary, and the board had insisted they attend as guests of honor. The flight felt surreal. The city skyline, once a symbol of tension, now shimmered with nostalgia instead. When their car pulled up to the old glass building, Evelyn paused before getting out. "It feels different," she said, "like the building grew kinder." David smiled. "Maybe it did. Maybe you taught it how." Inside, hundreds of employees had gathered in the grand atrium, the same place where Evelyn had once stood at a microphone, her pride shining brighter than her purpose. Now, she walked in holding David's hand. The applause that erupted was thunderous, but it felt different, less like worship, more like welcome. Tom, her former event coordinator, now a humbled and reformed manager, greeted them near the stage. "Miss Moore, sorry, Mrs. Carter," he corrected himself awkwardly. "It is good to see you again." Evelyn smiled warmly. "It is good to see you too, Tom. You look happier." "I am," he said. "You were right. Listening changes everything." The ceremony began. A large screen displayed moments from the company's history: photos, projects, milestones. Then, unexpectedly, the first viral video appeared. That moment years ago when Evelyn had said the line that started it all: "Translate this and I will marry you." The crowd murmured, some chuckled, others smiled knowingly. Evelyn watched herself on the screen, her younger self, sharp and unaware. The clip continued to the moment David's calm reply silenced the laughter. "Language is not about power, it is about respect." The audience erupted in applause. David leaned toward her and whispered, "Still a classic." She laughed softly. "A very expensive one." When the lights dimmed again, Evelyn stepped up to the podium. Her voice carried through the hall, steady but full of emotion. "When I first stood in this room, I thought I was teaching the world a lesson about confidence. I was wrong. The world was teaching me one about humility." She paused, letting the words settle. "That day, I met someone who refused to answer arrogance with anger. He answered it with understanding. And that changed everything, not just for me, but for all of us." David joined her on stage to applause. "This company was never just about innovation," he said. "It was about translation, learning to speak in ways that connect, not divide." The crowd rose to their feet. Cameras flashed, but the moment felt intimate despite the size of the room. After the ceremony, Evelyn and David slipped away to the rooftop terrace where the city lights shimmered against the night. She leaned on the railing, her voice soft. "I used to dream about standing up here owning the skyline, but now I think the best view is beside you." He smiled. "You finally understand the language of balance." She turned to him. "You made me fluent." End quote. A light wind brushed through her hair as he reached for her hand. Below them, traffic flowed like ribbons of gold, the sound of the city rising like distant applause. "You know," she said, "this story began with laughter. People thought it was just another viral moment, but it was more than that. It was a mirror. It showed me who I was and who I could be." David squeezed her hand gently. "And what do you see now?" She looked out at the city, her voice quiet but certain. "A woman who learned that the greatest translation is not between languages, it is between hearts." He smiled. Then I would say you are fluent. She turned to him and smiled back. So are you, Mr. Carter? They stood there in silence, the city glowing beneath them, the skyline no longer a symbol of power but of possibility. And as the night stretched on, Evelyn realized something profound. The story that had once started with pride had ended with purpose. The sentence that once humiliated her had become the vow that redefined her life. Translate this and I will marry you was no longer a taunt, it was a truth. Because in the end, translation was not about words at all. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and love, the universal language that needs no interpreter. Winter returned to Paris, quiet and golden in its own way. The mornings were crisp, and the evenings smelled of roasted chestnuts and wood smoke. From their apartment window, David and Evelyn Carter could see the river shimmer beneath strings of holiday lights. The world had changed around them, but their rhythm remained the same, steady, calm, full of purpose. It had been 5 years since that day in the New York boardroom when everything began. The story had faded from the headlines, replaced by new dramas and distractions. But for those who remembered, Translate this and I will marry you had become more than a viral clip. It had become a proverb shared in classrooms, quoted in leadership books, and whispered in moments when people needed a reminder that dignity is not weakness and humility is not defeat. On a cold December morning, Evelyn stood in the Paris Translation Center, now the organization's global headquarters. The lobby walls were covered with photos, faces of students and workers from every country where the project had grown. Beneath each photo, a phrase appeared in 2 languages. Respect is the first translation. David was in the main hall, speaking with a group of volunteers. His voice carried across the room, calm and grounded. Every person you help here, he said, will carry that kindness forward. That is how languages live, not in books, but in people. When he noticed Evelyn watching from the doorway, he smiled. You are early. I wanted to see the morning rush, she said. It reminds me why we started. He chuckled. You mean why you started? I was just pretending to mop floors. She laughed softly. And look how that turned out. They walked together through the bustling hall, stopping to greet people as they passed. A young man approached, holding a notebook. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, he said, his accent thick but his words careful. Because of this program, I got a job as a translator for the embassy. You changed my life. Evelyn smiled warmly. No, she said, you changed it yourself. We just helped you find the words. After the young man left, David turned to her. You have become quite the teacher. I had a good one, she replied. Later that day, they attended a small ceremony in the courtyard. It was the 5th anniversary of the translation project's founding, and the staff had prepared a surprise, a new plaque mounted on the wall, engraved with the quote that had started everything. Language is not about power. It is about respect. David Carter. Beneath it, in smaller letters, another line had been added by the team. And respect is the language of love. Evelyn Moore Carter. As the crowd applauded, Evelyn looked at David and whispered, They still remember. He smiled. How could they forget? You made humility fashionable. She nudged him playfully. And you made patience viral. After the ceremony, the 2 of them took a walk by the river, their breath visible in the winter air. The city was quiet except for the distant sound of church bells and laughter from a passing group of children. Evelyn tucked her hand into his coat pocket. Do you ever think about how different things could have been? She asked. David nodded. All the time. If that day had gone differently, if I had reacted with anger instead of calm, we might never have met. The company might have crumbled. The message would have been lost. She looked up at him. You make it sound like fate. End this tea. Maybe it was, he said. Or maybe it was translation again, life finding the right way to say what needed to be said. They stopped near a bridge, the same one where they had stood months earlier in the rain. Snow began to fall gently, each flake dissolving as it touched the river. Evelyn smiled at the sight. It is beautiful, she whispered. David nodded. You know, when I was younger, I thought love was supposed to sound dramatic. Big gestures, big words, but now I think it is just this quiet, steady, real. She turned to him. Like translation, not about volume, but meaning. He smiled. Exactly. They walked home slowly, their footsteps blending with the rhythm of the city. Inside their apartment, the lights glowed soft and golden. On the wall above their desk hung a single framed photo, the moment from the New York event, frozen in time. Evelyn speaking into the microphone, David standing a few feet away with that calm, knowing look. She sometimes laughed at it, embarrassed by her younger self, but tonight she just stared at it with gratitude. That woman had no idea who she was about to meet, she said quietly. David came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. Neither did I, but she turned out all right. They sat by the window, watching the snow fall outside. Evelyn rested her head against his chest. You know what I realized? She said. We have spent years teaching people how to translate words, but what really matters is teaching them how to translate hearts. He nodded. The world could use more of that. For a long time they said nothing. The city below was still and bright, its lights reflecting off the water like tiny lanterns. Evelyn reached for his hand. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For never giving up on me. For seeing something in me worth translating. David smiled. It was never about changing you, Evelyn. It was about understanding you. And? She looked up at him, her eyes gentle. That is love, is it not? He nodded. That is the only translation that never gets lost. Outside, the church bells began to ring for midnight. Snow fell thicker now, covering the city in silence. And as they sat together by the window, two people once divided by pride and circumstance, they knew the story had come full circle. It had started with laughter and ended with understanding. It had started with a challenge and ended with a promise kept. And as the last line of their shared story wrote itself quietly in the air, Evelyn whispered with a smile, "Translation complete." The snow kept falling, soft and endless, as Paris slept beneath its blanket of light.